So, all right. So I was talking about all the different people at Dare, and I said that I wanted to start, we forget that we're talking about people, right? Everything we talk about, data, AI, whatever, it's about people at the end. And if we want to build things that help people, I think, we want to start from the people who are already helping people. So for me, that's kind of who I wanted to surround myself by. Um, so this reminded me of, I was thinking about my why I wanted to create a distributed research institute, and a small research institute, such that I hope there would be many similar ones. Like I'm not planning on, growing to take over the world or anything like that. I remember this tweet from Karen Howe where she said, when a company like Google or Microsoft or OpenAI builds these gargantuan models so that they, our benevolent tech dictators, get to exclusively decide what kinds of problems they want their models to tackle, that does not make the world a more equitable place. On top of that, name one technology in history that has successfully been redistributed completely equitably from the bastions of privilege and power to the have-nots in society. We've yet to achieve this with even the most basic resources like water, paper, electricity, or the internet. Um, and so, oh, I'm admitting people. And there was this, when we look at the history of technology or AI in general or any of this stuff, and when it is actually funded, it always has to do with, it's either warfare or some sort of war or, large tech companies trying to centralize power, right? So I thought this short paper, and I guess this is an article that Amanda wrote based on her paper, Machine Translation Shifts Power, is a good one that describes this, right? So it says, talks about how machine translation has its origins in Cold War era defense. Like the Russians want to understand each other. I'm sorry, the Americans wanted to know what the Russians were doing and all of that. It's all based on spying, etc., right? And then of course now it's because, some of these companies want to make lots of money. So this is a quote from Gideon Lewis, who said, the quote is in this paper as well, but he's a journalist. He said, the most important thing happening in Silicon Valley right now is not disruption. Rather, it's institution building and the consolidation of power on a scale and at a pace that are both probably unprecedented in human history, right? And so to me, I've been working on all sorts of things in terms of trying to mitigate some of the issues that we see. And at the end of the day, I keep on kind of hitting the limit of what I can do because of these institutional structures and institutional incentive structures that are in place. So I kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time thinking about that and trying to have a different kind of institutional incentive structures. So I mentioned this series, AI Colonialism series by Karen Howe. It's a series that she put out like a few months ago, and it goes around. It has 5 parts, and it talks about basically how AI is fueling a new sort of a colonial relationship, where, for example, you have all the data laborers who are in, countries that were formerly, colonized, right? And then all the centralized model builders are in, the US or something like that. So she goes to like 5 different locations and talks about how this colonial relationship exists, whether it's through surveillance or through, the labor conditions, etc. Um, so whether to me, all of the proliferation, right, the scale at which this is happening, whether it is all of these harmful systems that are larger and larger, or social media-based platforms, etc. The rush and to build and proliferate is predicated on the belief that, if you make things automated, you get to make lots of money without paying anybody to produce any goods, right? You don't pay human beings. So, but the thing is that the truth of the matter is that we know that there is no real automation here, right? That there are armies and armies of people who are exploited at the end of the production of AI systems who are either labeling data or doing something like that, right? Content moderators, data laborers, etc. And these people are extremely exploited. And so I think if we raised awareness about the labor conditions and how they are so exploited, and that was not allowed, I think that would actually do a lot to mitigate some of the harms that we're seeing, because the market wouldn't allow, they wouldn't, if they had to pay people a living wage, they wouldn't, calculate that having lots and lots of, models with lots and lots of data that needs to be labeled, etc., would be proliferated so quickly, right? So here's one example. There was this article that came on Time Magazine on a bunch of content moderators in Kenya. And this was this was I think it was, a few months ago as well. And it was a company called Sama. And it's an outsourcing company, mostly for data labeling, etc. And this is a big tactic, right? You have these large companies, whether it's Google, Facebook, Amazon, etc. They have these third-party contractors, and they have these, labeling companies. For example, Scale AI is another one. Sama is one, where most of the people they hire are outsourced, and they're mostly in vulnerable communities, right? And they don't have, other options for jobs, let's say. And so this was Daniel, who he is South African, and he worked at the Sama office in Nairobi, and with other content moderators. And of course, like, these are the people who, if there is any sort of label data that is labeled hate speech, they are the ones who label it, right? So that we don't see it, but also so that automated machine tools are trained to flag them. If there are people who, videos that we don't watch, they watch them so that we don't have to watch them on social media, some horrific videos, but they have to make decisions about these videos within like 50 seconds or something like that. So so when and all these people suffer from PTSD and all sorts of issues, and they're paid literally like $5,000 a year. And of course, the justification for that is, oh, we don't want to mess up their local market or something like that. So when they tried to unionize, then they fired him. They fired Daniel, and there's like a court case going right now. And there was one time where 8 Ethiopian content moderators quit in 1 week. There is a horrible, horrible war that is going on in Ethiopia right now, which is the world's deadliest war. There is a siege on the people of Tigray, 6 million people who haven't been able to access phone, electricity, or internet, or food or medicine, right? Millions dead, millions displaced, which we don't hear about on the news, which to me, it's pretty awful. And so all of that genocidal language was, on social media. So the content moderators who had to be dealing with this, 8 of them quit at the same time. So to me, what this shows is that on the one end of the spectrum, you have these exploited workers, right, people. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the spread of this whole awful language, right? And so these two are connected, right? If we had laborers who were not exploited, or who, were treated better, and who didn't have to be tracked every single time, like you have to make decisions about a video 50 seconds in, regardless of how long it is, perhaps we would even have, safer products. So I think this is the point that I made, right? This is the point that I made, that all of these issues we're talking about, whether it's large language models or other kinds of things that ingest lots of data, have a lot of scale, need a lot of people. And so if these people were not so exploited, I don't feel like we would have had a proliferation of all of these systems. So the point is that, right, like, we need a different paradigm that's helping us, that is actually helping people, right? Like tools that help people. And I've been trying to see, what are things I'm inspired by, because a lot of things I'm seeing are just so depressing and just for myself, if I'm going to build anything, what are things I should look into? What are things that are happening that I should be inspired by? And this story, I knew about it before, but it's still in this AI colonialism series. It's about the Maori in New Zealand, and what they were doing. And I found this to be really inspiring. So, um, the Maori are a colonized people in New Zealand. Their language was basically beaten out of them, right? You couldn't speak your language. And so there is a huge decline in people who are able to speak it. And so what this local radio station, Teku Media, did was they wanted to basically build language tech tools to help their community kind of revitalize their language, right? So, speech to text or other kind of tools. So what they did was they had a competition, right? So this radio station had a competition asking people to have speech and then also transcripted text. So they were able to gather a lot of data. So they had about 300 hours of annotated audio, and it was enough data to build a lot of models. But once they built this data, they got this offer to buy it or license it. I don't remember exactly, from a company called Lionbridge. It's an American company. I believe it's a data labeling company too. And they said no, and they published their rejection on it with a video talking about why they published this rejection. And they said, basically this is our language, and it's, data is the final frontier for colonization. And so basically they suppressed our language from our, grandparents, and now they want to sell our own language to us as a service, right? And so they went on to do a lot of things. They have this principles of Maori data sovereignty document that talks about, and I think I forgot where it was that they called the principles, they had a word for it, the translation of which actually meant like guardianship, guarding the data. They worked on this indigenous data sovereignty book. It's like 256 pages. I'm working my way through it. I haven't finished it yet. And they created this other platform too, to allow to help other smaller indigenous groups create their own language tech and retain, do as they please with their data, right? The way that they think is right for them. And right after I was reading the story just recently, there was kind of a similar example in the US of the kind of exploitation that they were talking about, right? So this was at Standing Rock, the Lakota basically tribe was talking about how they banned the Lakota Language Consortium. Right. And so here they're talking about what they did, right? So they said, these people have, these efforts to attack and intimidate our learners and teachers. And they continuously were misleading our elders to believe that first language speakers who are, very undercompensated and unattributed expertise will freely benefit our language learners, where in fact, what they were doing was they were using that knowledge and exploitation to actually generate products that they then sell back to them, right? So this is what I meant when I said in our values, community, not exploitation, right? This is the kind of exploitation that is done by a lot of researchers. And so they were talking about how, this is their right. This language is their language and their right that should be transferred to their generations and their kids. And they have these sacred knowledge and inalienable, and, they want to protect these sacred stories and knowledge. So this is, kind of a lot of what happens. I think the industry in general is predicated on a lot of exploitation, and I would say really theft, right, of whether it is data or knowledge. Some people that are doing the opposite of that, there's this other group called Masakani also, which is um, a grassroots organization, natural language processing based organization for African languages, again, that are trying to bring together a whole bunch of different organizations and build tools for African languages. This is another example specifically for Ghana. But so that was one thing that I one kind of in terms of natural language processing, something that I found inspiring, which is a group of people working on technology to actually help their community, but and also have ways to guard their data and make sure that, it's not they're not exploited. Another example that I have is from my former colleague Ernest and his collaborators. And so Ernest and sorry. Yeah, so this was from Uganda. And so Ernest and his collaborators had um, a they had they created this app to help farmers. So this app is on cassava disease detection. So cassava is a really very important food security crop in sub-Saharan Africa, and especially because of the climate change, they have because of the climate catastrophe, there's a lot of low yields. There's a lot of locust invasions and all sorts of viral disease that are bringing low yields. But it's very important to increase yields, right? And there are a lot of small smallholder farmer households growing cassava. And so they worked with farmers and other government experts to create this app that would basically try to classify disease incidence, the type of disease, and the severity of the disease, right? And there's also other tasks where you could do, counting and of pests and things like this. And so this helps the farmers actually kind of surveil their crops, right? Without having a lot of experts moving, far away from place to place. And so the thing is, this is the kind of reason why I wanted to start my own institute. When you are as an academic want to publish this kind of work, let's say in computer vision, research, right? It's extremely undervalued because first of all, the main thing you have to do here is, work on the data for a long time. So that means make sure you gather the data in a way that's not exploitative, but also is accurate. Work with the local groups and community to do this. And this requires a lot of time, energy, and effort. But if you want to go to publish this at a computer vision venue, they'll be like, first of all, they wouldn't value that time, energy, and effort. And secondly, they would even say, oh, is this generalizable though? Like, would it be generalizable to some other, task, as if, they pretend that they have this one, you can have benchmarks that, are used for any task anywhere all the time, And so my collaborators actually have a paper called AI and the Everything in the Whole Wild World data set, which is kind of making fun of this notion that you can have one benchmark for all tasks for everything rather than task specific benchmarks or task specific data sets. And that is also part of this whole, conversation on artificial general intelligence or whatever, which I think is so harmful because if you want to work on, if you want to make sure to document things properly or test things properly, you have to work on the actual task specific thing, right? Rather than pretend that there's some general thing for everything. And then you're not doing tests for anything. So anyhow, so this is the kind of stuff I see in our field. And the last example I'll give is from our work. And this is a project led by Raseja Safala, who is she actually was in Lisbon giving a talk at a conference a few months ago, I believe. So she is from South Africa. She was born and raised, like I said, in a township. And it's also collaboration with these other people. And so this is on analyzing the impacts of spatial apartheid using computer vision techniques and satellite imagery. So here you can see, this is a aerial image of Cape Town from like 2017, I believe. So you can see on the left is like, these huge mansions and, houses with huge yards. On the right, you have these townships, right? And they're small and, much smaller, much more uniform. And this was done by design during apartheid. So there was an act that in 1954 that said that non-white people have to live in the townships. White people can live in the suburbs, and the budget was allocated accordingly, right? Much less budget for the townships than these suburbs. And so here's another example. And so what our question here is, can we use satellite imagery and some computer vision techniques to kind of, segment out, the townships versus the suburbs and look at their evolution across time? Since this is 2017, apartheid supposedly legally ended like 30 years ago, right? And so that was kind of our question. And so if you look at satellite imagery, this is sort of a time lapse over time that shows you. So for example, you can see, I think it's since 1964, how things have changed, right? You can see the neighborhood sort of changing from between 1964 and later on. And this is where Raseja grew up, and the township where she grew up. But so, here's another example. These are this is what it kind of looks like, our images. So here's an image from 2011, 2013, 2015, 2017. You can see kind of how there's much more stuff that was built between 2011 and 2017. So what we did was we created a data set of, where we have this kind of image, and we have labels for that image. So these clusters would be kind of labeling the neighborhood, right? So if you overlay these images, you would see that. So where this is means that it is, like a non-wealthy neighborhood, right? And then the white would be vacant land. So that's kind of how we were annotating the data set into 4 classes: non-wealthy, wealthy, non-residential, and vacant land. So again, before I say what I want to say, I'll talk about, the kinds of things we're trying to do is, let's say before the census is available or something like that, if we look at, even if the census is available, actually, because the census, and we're trying to tell the South African government not to do this, but the census, what they do is they lump these 2 regions into one area of former residential neighborhoods, which, if you're trying to understand the impacts of such a horrible thing that happened in the past, how can you do that, right? You're basically ignoring that these townships were created because of spatial apartheid. So we had to, the biggest thing we had to do is we had to figure out how to label townships, right? So go back to like 2011 and things like that, and recruit a whole bunch of people who lived in different townships, look up the names of townships and see, which ones were townships at the time, to annotate our data set, because we couldn't use the census to do that. And so the kinds of things we're trying to do here, basically we spent like 4 years working on getting the data set, and now we're trying to see, what we can do with it, or 3 years. In collaboration with others. So one of the things we're looking at is, for example, here's an example of a plot that we made. So B is background, non-residential, NR is non-residential, NW is non-wealthy, W is wealthy, right? So if I have this bar plot, it says, for example, out of the pixels that we found to be background, like vacant land in 2011, what happened? How did they change in 2017, right? So in this first plot, it means, okay, 90% of them that were gray are still gray, which means 90% of the land that was vacant is still vacant. But then out of the one that was built, a lot of it is blue, right? And blue is wealthy. So a lot of it was, as from our calculations says, a lot of it was built into wealthy neighborhoods. But we have to do now a lot of like error analysis to see, how much of this, can we really say? With what certainty can we say these things? So this is the kind of stuff we're trying to do. But if you're more interested in our work, here is the paper, and we're about to come out with the date. Think about it. We published a paper in December, and we're just about to come out with the actual data set and visualizations and maps, etc., because we've been working on those things since the paper was published. But so what I want to say here is, again, a rant on the academic community. So like I said, we spent years and working on the data set, right? And somehow this dichotomy of how data work is devalued is really connected to kind of the labor exploitation that I was talking about, right? People want to talk about things like they're automated, that there's magic, that there's this magical algorithm that does stuff, and really mask the armies and armies of people and workers and data laborers involved in this kind of stuff. And the data work is similar. The academic community wants to pretend that, it's like some algorithm that gave you a breakthrough, and really devalue any kind of data related work. So even when data work is published, it's kind of like, oh, it was just a data set paper. It's like second class, and then when you try to publish data related work, because our entire paper is talking about what we had to do to construct the data set, what if there were innovations, what they were, right? And it's all related to the data. And the kinds of reviews we were getting in the beginning when we were trying to publish this paper in computer vision venues was like, oh, but it's just a data set paper, but this is too specific. Like, is it really, relevant to a general audience? And so what does that exactly mean? Like, again, we go back to the whole, is it generalizable question, right? And which I think that that's a really a problematic view, because if you're thinking about safety and fairness and whatever, you have to be super specific. If you're not working on things that are super specific, you're not going to be thinking about the right questions. You don't even know what questions to ask. So anyways, finally, what happened was, NeurIPS, which is a machine learning conference, they created a data sets and benchmarks track for the first time. And in those data sets and benchmarks track, it's all, papers that discuss issues with data sets, whatever, anything to do with data sets and benchmarks. You can introduce one, or you can talk about a particular methodology. And so I had been advocating for something like that for a long time, because if we, for example, tell PhD students to work things on things slowly, and how data is really important, and you have to be all ethical, whatever, and they spend 5 years, working on one data set and analyzing it, and they can't publish anything, they can't get a job, they can't get any respect, why would they do that, right? So we go back to the institutional incentive structures. So finally, there was this data sets and benchmarks track, and we published this paper on that in that track. And so I found myself in that kind of situation many times, like when I worked on gender shades, which is a paper on automated facial analysis tools and disparities in error rates. I couldn't imagine where we could publish this paper. And then there was a conference that we created called FACT, where we were able to publish it. So, but at least, being in an independent institute where, I mean, my job doesn't depend on pleasing like more, the people in computer vision who've been around for a long time or something like that. We can push the boundaries, right? If there's no conference that wants to publish our work, we can still work on it, right? Because we're not, necessarily, I don't know, measuring our success that way. So anyhow, this is the end of my talk now, so we can just have a discussion or answer some questions.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Everyone can put their you can put your questions on the chat, or we can open up the sound. But I really liked it, and I wanted to know more about. I guess I'll start. Sorry.
Yeah.
So perhaps you can tell us, I mean, a bit about how is it that you, well, what is it, how is it that you find the things, the issues? You said in order to get specific answers to the problems that we have to have specific questions. So how is it that you find those, and how is it that you also attempt to give back? You know, you've set up this amazing institute that in parts pays attention to issues like brain drain, etc., that we know happens to, you know, poorer developing countries. So I guess how is it that you find the issues that you want to focus on, but also how is it that you give back to the communities that you're studying, or if
Well,
you to do it?
I think that for me, it all depends on the people. So I really dislike the kind of things that I the example that I gave from of the people coming into the Lakota community and being exploitative, versus, you know, our fellow Raseja who grew up in a township working on this project. That's very different because, you know, she is from that community and it's not like an outsider coming and quote unquote studying. It's somebody who, you know, understands the issues and also kind of can think about, you know, how to work on things in a way that helps her own people, right? And then when the papers are published, she's the one who talks about it. She's the one, the first author. She's the one who like, this is the kind of stuff. So for me, that's the ideal case scenario. The ideal case scenario is that someone who knows, you know, who has some sort of connection to whatever they're studying, working on it. If I, you know, didn't talk to her or the others on this project, I wouldn't have worked on this project. I just I don't under I wouldn't think it's my place to do a thing on South Africa because, you know, I'm not from there. You know, sure, I can help with the computer vision techniques or other things, other expertise. I can lend my expertise in the background, but I definitely can't be the leader and, you know, in this kind of project. So that's my attitude to a lot of the projects that we're working on, you know, and one of the things actually we're doing is we're putting out this document, our research philosophy document that Alex and Mila are working on. It's going to be a living document. And so we're probably going to have a first version of it in the next month or two. And, you know, that's sort of to help us think about what are our procedures and what are the pitfalls that we're thinking of when we're doing research. So, for example, another example is that we're working on research on the harms of social media platforms. And we are doing starting the work on Eritrea. Why Eritrea? Well, you know, I give specific justifications for why. You know, it's the country with the lowest internet penetration rates, one of the highest migrations in the world, the most censored country in the world, and currently engaged in a genocidal war in Ethiopia. And but I'm also of Eritrean descent, so I care about this place that nobody seems to care about, and I can understand the nuances of what I'm studying, whereas some other random people can't, right? They don't speak. You know, I only speak one of the languages that are spoken there, right? There's 9 of them, or I mean, at least 3 or 4 or 5 of them, and you know, 9 different groups that speak different languages. So I can at least understand the nuances. And so when I was hiring people who are working on that project, I wanted to make sure that we had people who, there are a lot of victims of social media, transnational repression, a lot of victims of hate speech, disinformation, misinformation, especially women, right? I mean, women, being a woman online is really not fun. So, but what happens a lot of times is that these people do all this work. So Meron is an example. They have this deep knowledge, have been doing a lot of work for a long time, but they don't have as much of the pedigree. So what happens is that their knowledge is really exploited. So some news organization or something would use them and get a lot of information from them, but not credit them, not pay them. And so there are also a lot of people who are doing, because they're victims and they're worried about their families, doing all of this work on, you know, reporting accounts or analyzing issues, you know, for the social media platforms should be doing for free. So what I try to do is find these people who are, you know, victims, but already doing the work for free, and think about how they could be, you know, incorporated into the project and get paid also, right? And so that they're not exploited, and so that they're treated like experts. So that, to me, that's the way in which I'm trying to approach things. Like if someone says, you know, you should do some work that, you know, in Brazil. I'm like, well, I'm not Brazilian, and I don't understand, you know, I don't really understand all of the nuances there. So if it has to be led by someone from there. That's really how I try to approach it, right?
They keep fighting with Zoom. Thanks. So let's see who else has questions. I can give you sound if you need. You just need to signal to me that, or signal to us that you have a question, I guess, by raising your hand. I have another question, but I would like, there is a hand. Okay, there we go. How do I, Patricia, help me? How do I give voice to? Oh,
I
okay,
just
so you can go ahead. Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Timnit. Really stimulating talk and a lot of really good points and points that I completely agree with, of course. My question has to do with the difficulty to integrate this kind of vision with the financial paradigm that we have.
yeah.
Because as we know, the empowerment of these other agents, or the empowerment of the otherness, maybe we can put it like that. Um, Within research, that's really expected, right? Ethnography, this need for us to understand the environment that we're researching on. But as we know these days, financial interests tend to come first, right? So do you have any recommendations or any thoughts on how we can actually counter that tendency to simply, you know, squeeze things dry for profit and moving
Yeah, it's
on, right?
difficult, right? Because for me, when I was talking about our um, values and all of those things, you know, what they all result in is means be prepared to do less things and spend a lot more money on each thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're thinking, you know, extracting knowledge means, you know, you're not gonna, you know, your money goes more a longer way. Right. And then
Yeah.
doing things faster means you put out more stuff and then you get more money. I mean, even in a nonprofit context, that's how it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard. So first you know, it's really difficult to be all of the changes need to be institutional, I think, because in order to encourage everybody to do something. So for example, if we say people need to write less papers, you know, if the people who write more papers are gonna have much more of an advantage, and then the people who write less don't have a job. I mean, how is that gonna happen? So somehow there needs to be an institutional thing. Or if we think everybody has to write documentation, this was a problem. So for example, when I was at Google, you know, we wrote a paper called Model Cards, and that paper was about saying that people should, it's just like a standard engineering practice. You should, you know, test, do edge cases and test all the models you have and what it's supposed to be used for and all of that, and then document it and let people know. So when it came time for us to ask people to do this, they don't want to do it. Why? Because we're asking them to spend even more time before they launch something or not launch it. and even have more resources, right, to do this kind of testing and stuff like that. So we're saying instead of, making $100, on this thing, you might make $5. Like, who's
Right.
going to do this on purpose, right? Because
Right.
that's not the incentive structure we have. So what I've been trying to do is I've been trying to, like, for instance, I made an appearance at the European Union Parliament where I was telling them that we need more funding for basic research that is not tied either to the military, military
Yeah.
interests or corporate interests, just, so that basic research is funded in that way. And I think that to remove the extractive nature of academic research where people want to suck everyone dry. I mean, I think we need to have more incentive structures to focus more on quality rather than quantity, but yeah, I think it all has to be done institutionally. And I'm very worried even for our institute about long-term sustainability, because right now we have our grants come from foundations. And so far they initially, they really did fund my vision. I didn't feel constrained or that I have to really change our direction in for them. But we all know that's not going to last. And the next kind of shiny thing comes and they're going to kind of veer that way, or we say the wrong thing and then they're going to veer that way. I was reading a book called The Revolution Will Not Be Funded, which was basically
Yeah.
about that. And it was written 20 years ago, but it's very relevant. So I was thinking, I was like, okay, so what are ways in which we can sustain ourselves? So I'm thinking that if I have an advantage to fundraise right now, I want to do that, but for long-term sustainability rather than growth. So that, I'm going to try to see if I can, create an endowment or something like that, such that a certain percentage of our budget always comes from that. And then I was thinking, okay, what are kind of our own revenue generation streams that we could have?
Right.
There's a bunch of people with expertise. Maybe there's some services we can provide that where we can generate 25% of our own revenues. But then that has its own issues too, because we want to be a research institute and we don't want to push people to just do random stuff that is not, So those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. And I think we want a lot more funding for basic research that is not tied to these two interests. So I've been trying to advocate for that as well. But it's difficult. Yeah.
So more questions? Very fun. I think you're not mute, you're muted. So can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm sorry. I just wanted to thank Timnit for her words, but I had been muted in the meantime. I do have another question, but obviously, if nobody else does.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. Thank you. Bit of a provocation, maybe, right? And thank you for the expression parachute research. Really interesting. I'll look it up in more detail. And it has to do with that expression and the concept that it encapsulates. In my experience, I've seen the opposite happen as well, meaning that in certain environments, people tend to trust when authority and legitimacy come from the outside, right? Situations in which you only perceive yourself as yourself as, or your culture, your ecosystem, whatever, as
Yeah, I totally
valuable
get what you're
when
saying.
it's actually vouched from an external kind of presence or
Yeah.
mechanism, right? And I think that's a difficulty, isn't it? Because often people, it's a bit like a Stockholm syndrome kind of situation.
Yeah.
People want to be validated from the outside, right? So I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on that, if you have any experience on that kind of situation.
Yeah,
Because,
absolutely. I mean, it is yeah, it's kind of like that Stockholm syndrome kind of thing that you're talking about, right?
mm,
So why, you know, it just like, for example, when I was I was born and raised in Ethiopia, right? And what they're proud of is the fact that I'm on Time magazine and the New York
mm,
Times, and it's like, why is that the thing that needs to happen for you
mhm,
to um recognize your own people? So why can't we create our own, you know, things, ways of recognizing people that don't need external validation?
yeah,
And then the same, people with expertise from the inside aren't really as valued as people from the outside. So it's difficult because on the one hand, you have, a groups of people who are the examples that I mentioned, who are very aware of this dynamic and want to protect their knowledge and their expertise and understand
yeah,
it. And then on the other hand, you have people who are the opposite, like you said. It's like devaluing of your own knowledge and your own history. And I find personally that that also comes with the educated class of people,
right,
and in my own culture. It's really interesting. Like, I mean, even let's talk about, what civilized means. That comes with the with the educated class, who all of a sudden, the way they carry themselves, it's more civilized to be a specific way.
right, yeah,
And then they look down upon like the villagers who are not, civilized. They start acting like the people who called us savages and stuff. There's
mm,
this internalized kind of self-hate. So yeah, I think that exists a lot, and I see it actually in technology specifically. On the one hand, you have people who are really worried about their data sets. Why do we want to build this? Why should I help you? Like, why is it helping me? Why is it helping my people? On the other hand, I see a lot of people who are just literally just trying to be Silicon Valley or
yeah,
replicate exactly what's going on.
yeah,
So I'm,
yeah, yeah,
teaching, and they're like talking about face recognition. I'm like, dude, I'm trying to stop it there. And why are you, and they're like, that it'll help for security and stuff. I'm like, is this really what you want to be doing here? It's just
mm,
copying what happened there, because what happened there is shiny. And
mm,
also, but this is also it shows you the extent to which American propaganda reaches the entire world,
right,
like, Hollywood and, whatever. It's extremely potent. So
yeah,
I think that it's also the extent to which, these large nations have an
mm,
advantage in terms of exporting a lot of propaganda in a way that doesn't seem like
mhm,
propaganda.
yeah,
So that's a problem. And it's, I think it's really important for people. So sometimes when I talk in African settings, I say, think about our food, like, and how unique each of our foods are, right? It's not just one food of the continent, but like different countries, different regions, the care with which we make it, how spicy it is, how unique it is. Think about the music, you think about, the fashion, the clothing. It's like very specific to each, region, and it's beautiful, right? And even when people are mixing and matching between different
mhm,
regions, it's very authentic. It's done in a really thoughtful way. And I'm just like, now think about the science and the technology. Why does it has to be, replicating exactly what it's done in this kind of one location, right? So that's a struggle too.
yeah.
It's like, I agree with what you said.
All right, thank you so much.
So now we have Sophia Ponte, who has her hand.
I have a very brief, maybe innocent question, but I was thank you first so much for bringing your thoughts, and the presentation of your institute is amazing, great to see so much diversity there. I was wondering if you could share with us the moment or the moments that made you realize that you wanted to work counter globalization. You know, how that, because it's so that's what we are so pressured to do. Oh, you need to devise a project that can be replicated. It needs to be a model to be, you know, developed elsewhere as well. And so I find so healthy this idea of, you know, not working in that system that is so embodied already in researchers. So could you just share with us?
Things need to scale, all needs to scale. So actually Alex Hanna, you know, has this paper called Against Scale, Provocations Against Scale, and against scale thinking, I believe, provocations against scale thinking. And it's kind of going against this idea that scale is so important, scale is everything that people have in Silicon Valley, and talks about how even if you want to quote unquote scale, it's more likely that you would achieve that by actually thinking very specifically and locally first in some way. And in my work, that has been the case. And anything I have seen actually succeed has been the case, because what happens is people see what you've done, and when they see the success, they adapt it to their own context, right? And they're more suited to doing that. So in my own example, so for example, my friend Ifeoma Ozoma, she is a whistleblower who was pushed out of Pinterest, and she broke her non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement, and you know, took a huge risk, and then worked on an act called the Silence No More Act, to make it illegal to force people to be unable to discuss the issues of their, you know, when they're leaving, to force them to be quiet, basically, if it has to do with, you know, abuse and bullying, etc., in the workplace. And you know, she could have tried to make this bill pass federally in the United States, the whole US, right? But that was going to be impossible, right? And so what she did was she started in California. Within 1 year of her getting fired, I mean, I don't remember, 2021 is when it was passed. And it was a big deal. I already saw the impacts of that act. It's a big deal because many of the tech companies are located in California, even though they have far-reaching. In fact, so California law actually would really is much more important for these tech companies than, you know, so you can start to, like, if you see a sign there, you can start to plug it right here before it goes, you know. If we started at the UN, can you imagine? Because if we think, okay, scale, we have to do the whole world. Well, that means we gotta create a law that affects the entire world. When like, I mean, can you imagine what would we get done? You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. So I think that was a good example. So what happened is, this law passed in California already. It is allowing whistleblowers to do things, and then they passed a similar, other friends who were fired from Apple for similar things worked together, passed it in Washington State. Now we have Amazon's headquarters are in Washington State. We have, you know, Microsoft. So now you have all of these two states, but really it has a huge impact. And of course they were thinking about tech, but really it's not just tech workers who are going to be affected by this. So, you know, they weren't thinking like we have to do the whole world. They were thinking very, very locally, state by state. And then what happens is other people see it. Oh, we want to adopt this. We want to adopt that. So that's kind of how it spreads, right? And so even when you see, you know, protests, I'd say, you know, in you know, people start in one city, in one country, and then it spreads. One people from one country see the protest there, then it spreads in a different place. It spreads in a different place. So I think that is really how change is done, because when you know your specifics, you can really measure progress, and you really know what to do, right? Other than when you don't know the specifics, you can't do that. So in my own in my own work, I have tried to, that's kind of, for example, why I'm looking at Eritrea in terms of social media platforms. It's a small country. I can kind of there's things I understand, and I understand what I don't understand. I know who I need to recruit, what all the nuances are. And even that is so much work. Then I can say, here is all the things I've uncovered here. Look at that, this small country, and now imagine, extrapolate to other places, right? So that's sort of how I approach. I've always approached my work. When we started Black in AI, it wasn't Black in everything, Black in STEM, and it also wasn't everyone in AI, right? It was, and that was because I understood the issues for that we needed to do, right? Even the Black in STEM organizations weren't really doing that much for the kind of context that I was working on, because they were very general. And then once we created Black in AI, there was disabilities in AI, queer in AI, Latinx in AI, and they kind of adopted things for their own, indigenous in AI. And then there was also Black in X, Black in Neuro, Black in Physics, Black in whatever, I don't know, there was all of these organizations. And for instance, the ones in AI, we were then able to create much more power, because when we see an issue, we could collectively say, hey, Black in AI, Latinx in AI, disabilities in AI, queer in AI, women in machine learning, whatever, we're saying this, right? We can collectively do that. So that's, how I think anything can really be done. And so this idea that you can just proliferate one thing in the whole world and it works fine, we're seeing that it's not correct, right? It doesn't work. So, that's how I approach my work.
Wow, that was a fantastic
Oh,
answer.
by the way, sorry. I think there is this book called Viral Justice that Ruha Benjamin just wrote. I haven't finished it. I have my copy. It just came out, and I think that is the idea she talks about. Just this, this focus on your specific context, and then that kind of goes viral, kind of thing. Yeah. Sorry, Anna.
I know. No, I wrote it down. All these references. It's 7:58. So because people are trickling out, I want to say that was an amazing final answer, at least for me. I had more or less the same question as Sophia, although she put it much better than I would have. And I think in some ways you're leaving us with some hope, which is a really nice feeling to have, because in some ways I think we know the struggle, and I've read some of your work, and I know, for example, your push to ban facial recognition in security, etc. But at the same time, we're left with the possibility to act locally, which I think really matters. And this idea that problems are situated and require situated solutions, and that one size does not fit all, etc. We've been really grateful to be happy and fortunate to have you here. Thanks everyone for being here also. Thank you, Timnit, so much. And at least I think I speak for everyone when I say we wish you all the best and success in all these efforts, because I think they matter a lot. I think we cannot sustain this model that, as Heitor said, that is based on profits. And so hopefully your endeavors will be successful and will benefit us all. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see
Have
you
a good evening.
in November. Yes, you too. Bye.
Bye.